So the update's finally here, and with it brought some new content, a new Abyss Colossus, and the main star of the stage, Ines Raya herself. Well, I mean, I guess Jabo also got a buff kit too, but like, who really cares when I can do fancy ass damage like this? Now with the new Erosion Purge content really pushing characters and damage outputs to the limit for mobbing, and the new Abyss fight pushing single target DPS outside of that of the chill element, sorry Hayley, it really looks to have a Descendant that can do all that and more. So in this video we'll be looking at my current go-to builds for Ines, with one geared towards dungeon and mobbing based content, even capable of taking on that level 20 purge run with ease, and another built for Colossus fights, allowing us to spam away and watch Defiler fall over in less than a minute. But what good is me talking about them without showing, so let's get right to it. Alright then, so let's start having a talk about the brand new Descendant that is Ines Raya. What's the main thing that she can kind of do? Well, she is a fantastic mobber. She is really fast on her feet, she's got really good cooldowns, she has a fantastic kit, and I really actually love her. I fell in love with her as soon as I actually started like trying to level her up. Now that I've got her fully catalysed though, she is an absolute powerhouse, and we can start talking about as to how we can get the most out of that when it comes to the mobbing side of things, and then we'll quickly swap over to the Defiler side, so you can see as to how her Colossus side really cranks out those DPS and being able to getting a kill just around about that 30-second kind of mark. Now the first thing we should probably focus on is how a kit all kind of works and how it all comes together. It is a very confusing kit, and to be completely honest with you, I don't understand how all of it works, but the main kind of things that you should focus on is the fact that her passive allows her to be able to get a skill critical hit rate increase based on your max MP. The more MP that you have, the more kind of base skill critical hit rate that you will have, and that really kind of filters into everything to do with the build. So we will be going into critical hit rate, we will be going into critical hit damage with Ines Raya. It makes the most sense, it is one of the best ways to be able to get the most damage out of her. In this case we will be going for an extra MP roll onto our sensor, and that will actually apply on top of this, and it will give us even more skill critical hit rate. So that's one thing, kind of like tip I would recommend right off the bat. Onto she will also get MP recovery based on being able to get skill critical hits on enemies with Conductor. Conductor is her passive, not really a passive, but it is a debuff that is applied on every single skill cast as long as you hit an enemy. So this is going to give you a chance of being a 5% chance of being able to recover your MP. It's going to also trigger Dark Current, which does extra damage based on your MP, and it's going to do it in a small AoE, so it's going to help you out with the mobbing side there. And then Conductor onto over here is going to do extra damage based on the abilities that get hit. So in this case, your skill 1, if you hit an enemy with Conductor, you will be doing an extra 51.9% of your skill power on top of that 207.7% that you were already doing. This does increase depending on the skill that you will be going for. So skill 2 will do 106, skill 3 will do 921%, but lastly a skill 4, because of how it kind of works and because of the massive AoE of it, it will only do an extra 16.4%. One thing I will say for this is that unlike things like damage over time and things where you can really benefit from going into extra kind of like modifier, so for example if you go for skill simplification, with other Descendants, with how this all kind of works, essentially because this was base modifier rather than being like a tech or you know, singular, things like that, because this is base skill power modifier, it used to show on like the item card for like damage over time and things like that, so secondary effects did get affected by this, but in the case of Ines Raya this isn't the case, so therefore you cannot increase the amount of damage that Conductor will be doing. Now one last thing to talk about when it comes to her kit is going to be a case that she is both a singular and tech Descendant as standard. So in this case, skill 1 and skill 3 are going to be both singular, skill 2 and skill 4 are both going to be tech. Now this does pose a little bit of a problem, because that means that it is going to be a little bit difficult to decide what type of reactor you want to go for to maximise the amount of DPS. While right off the bat you do kind of want to go for singular, because skill 1 and skill 3 are fantastic abilities in their own right. Once you start getting a few extra mods for Ines Raya, you will start gravitating more towards tech. It does make sense to be able to have both. It also kind of helps the fact that electric singular can also be used on Bunny, so it's not a complete waste to be able to farm. But once you start realising what her red mods can actually do, you will be swapping away from singular and then start gravitating more towards tech. So if you are just primarily using it to start out with, to be able to do some farming, to be able to do some leveling before you start going after some of her red mods, then singular is going to be the way forward. If you are going to be going into more endgame stuff, if you kind of want to be able to focus on what her best builds are, then tech is definitely going to be the kind of reactor you want to be able to farm. So that's all the boring stuff, that's all the kind of like the ins and outs as to how the build all kind of works. So how are we all going to be starting with the modules to be able to get the most out of her? Well, in this case, it doesn't make any more sense to be able to go for anything other than her red mod. In this case, Time of the Hunting Hounds is a fantastic mod. If you are going to farm anything for Ines Raya, it's going to be this. Being able to swap this over so your skill 1 and your skill 3 now change a little bit, but become tech as well, so that means that every single one of her abilities are now going to be tech focused, means that we're going to be having some real nice intrinsic kind of workings with Secret Garden. We're going to now have a reactor that can now work with all of our skills rather than just 2 of them. Tech really is a nice thing for us to kind of build into with this ability, so rather than going forward like generic skill power modifier, we can now just go for a tech-based one. This mod does so much for you. On top of that, it changes skill 1 to something that's a little bit more spammable. It won't be bouncing around as much, it won't be hitting as many enemies as the first one without this would do, but what it will do is it reduces the cooldown, it reduces the MP cost, so you can constantly spam this out. It does more damage, it bounces less time, so it just becomes a little bit more of a focused skill. This is absolutely fantastic, and I literally cannot understate as to how good this red mod pretty much is to make skill 1. Skill 3 on the other hand is a little bit of a difficult one because it's more risky. It puts you in the thick of it. It kind of puts you in the actual like battle itself. You will be very vulnerable, but it is still a really cool looking skill. That's the only thing I can say for it. But you won't primarily be using this. You'll probably use this in like maybe like a dire situation. But essentially, when you start using this kind of build, you will just be using skill 1, skill 2 very rarely, and then skill 4 to be able to then start kind of like setting up or going after even more mobs. So now that we've talked about the red mod, let's start talking about the rest of them. In this case, we will be going for cooldown mods, so we are going to be going into a skill-based focus kind of build. So in this case, Nimble Fingers and MP Conversion is going to be taken front and center. Now, one downside to going with MP Conversion is reducing our max MP, and as you'll remember from when we talked about the passive, this does affect our skill critical hit chance. Now, we can get around this, it's not a problem, it just means that we kind of have to avoid any more kind of negative downsides when it comes to MP Conversion or max affecting our max MP. So in this case we can get away with it minus 15%, but any more than that is probably going to be a no-go. So this is the only one that's going to be affecting our MP going forward for the rest of the build, but that 62.1% skill cooldown is just too good to be able to pass up on, so we definitely want to be able to grab that. We then do take it a little bit of a step further with the next row, so in this case we will be going on these focus on mods, and in this case it will be focus on tech, and we will also be grabbing focus on electric. This is going to give us extra skill cooldown, putting us up to 74.3%, but on top of that it's also going to be giving us extra modifiers, which really helps out with everything across the build, especially with like Snare Hunter that does have a low power modifier, and then on top of that electric skill power is just going to feed into everything to be able to do with the build. It's just going to massively increase the amount of damage that we can output. Now for our third row that's going to be going here, we are going to be giving some extra quality of life when it comes to this build. So in this case we will be grabbing a HP mod. The best one to be able to go for in my opinion is going to be increased HP. The one that you probably want to avoid is going to be, there is one around here, is going to be Stim Accelerant. The reason why is that it's going to be affecting our max MP, once again affects our critical hit chance, so you definitely want to avoid that one where possible. In this case you do want to go for increased HP. I will talk about a little bit later about a flex spot. If you are going to want an extra increased like HP kind of mod, then the best one to probably go for is HP Amplification. That's just future knowledge ready for the rest of the actual modules we're going to be slotting in here, but HP Amplification is 100% better than Stim Accelerant when it comes to Ines Raya. Now as for the other quality of life one, which is going to be going here, we will be going for a range mod. And this is going to be skill expansion. This is going to allow us to be able to pretty much cap out on our range, because you will see that our 2, 3 and 4 skills have a max expandable range of 200%. That means if we do go over an increase of 100% to our skill range, it is essentially going to be capped and it will be a little bit of a waste. So we are going to be 7% short, but it's still going to be fine. This is going to be more than enough range that we kind of need, and it's also going to help us out with an extra bounce when it comes to our floating lightning as well. Now the next 3 mods that I do want to talk about are going to be this crit package that we've going to be kind of like already kind of hinted at a little bit earlier on in the video. So if I swap this over to crit, we will be grabbing both of the blue modules. This is going to be skill insight, skill concentration, and then for the last one we will be grabbing front lines. The reason why is we want to maximize the amount of critical hit damage. Now usually with critical kind of builds with Descendant, you grab the 4 package, which will grab emergency measures as well, but as you can see, because of the reactor, which I will be talking about a little little bit later on with the extra skill critical hit rate, you can see that we are sitting at that 100% of that rate right there. So we do not need that extra mod, and the amount of damage that it kind of gives us is very negligible, so it's not worth being able to put in emergency measures. So this is the only 3 that you essentially need for this build to be able to hit that 100% and be able to maximize out on that damage. Now, as for this last mod slot, this is going to be your flex spot. This is going to be something you can mess about with depending on what you need from your build. In the case of when we mentioned about the HP, you can definitely turn this into a cerulean slot and just be able to put that extra HP mod that was right there. You can use this to be able to help you out with quality of life, to be able to go for extra damage, to be able to help you out with potent collector, so you get even more like the plasma, to be able to help you out with some of your abilities. You've got ways to be able to reduce your skill cost, to be able to offset your component set, which we'll be talking about. There's so many different things that you can mess about with by putting in here, I think the best one to be able to go in this slot is going to be Decimator. When you defeat an enemy inflicted with debuffs, you get an increasing stack to your skill power modifier. Because this is going to be our mobbing build and every single one of our abilities applies the debuff that is Conductor, once we manage to kill that enemy, we will then get a stack of this, which will then increase the amount of damage we will be then dealing out there. Once again, this does not affect the Conductor, like the amount of increased damage that we get from the enemies that are inflicted with it, but it will help us out with things like Snare Hunter, which already has low modifiers, so the more Decimator that we can kind of get works in tandem with Focus on Tech, so we get even more damage out of that, and it will obviously help out the rest of the abilities, the main one that really kind of helps out is going to be Snare Hunter, and it makes it such an efficient killer as an ability. So there you go, that's my setup when it comes to the mobbing side of things. So let's start having to talk about the Defiler. I did already have a build pretty much kind of like set up, which managed to get me like a minute and a half kind of kills. It was fairly consistent to be able to take down Defiler. It had a little bit of tankiness like built into it, so I was able to take a couple of hits. But after looking at a recent video by Senevades and being able to see all the research that he kind of did going into the skill 1 and how it all kind of is affected by range and everything like that, it seems that range is the secret sauce to be able to go into Defiler and to be able to turn Ines Raya into a Colossus killer. So this is going to be the actual setup that you do want to be able to go for if you're going for Defiler. Now, the only downside with this is that it does make you an absolute glass cannon. You will not be able to take one hit pretty much. You may be able to if you're on the outside of things. If you get touched by poison, you are pretty much kind of like done for in that current life. But if you know the patterns, if you know how to be able to evade, which is very similar to that of from the other part, Toxic Colossus, when the hard fights and all that kind of thing. Like if you remember those kind of days where you were going back and forth on those fights, Defiler is very, very similar. You just kind of need to know how to bait out his attacks, and then you can just kind of get him into a stun state, and that's when Dangerous Ambush kicks in and just kind of like helps you finish off the rest of the fight. Going into range, this much range anyway, is going to add you 2 extra bounces to this ability, which means that you will not be doing just 4 times the amount of damage with your when you cast this skill. You're now doing 6. It's kind of like adding an extra 50% increase to the amount of damage every single time you cast this ability, and it's that combination combined with how the low cooldown, but your ability to be able to spam this out, it just absolutely melts it. It's similar in effect to when you're able to stack over puddles with Ultimate Valby. That's the best way that I can kind of think about it, but every single one with its own instance of damage, you're kind of casting out your abilities that fast, and because they're critting as well, you're hitting for some insane kind of damage, and then once you kind of like get them immobilized, Dangerous Ambush then just kind of like cranks it up to 11. Now, we'll just heed a moment of warning that, like I said, this is a glass cannon. You will just kind of like die if you just get hit by like a puddle of poison, if you just get hit once, it's things like that. But it is a fantastic setup, and if you are looking for fast ways of being able to farm the currency, whether it's for the outfits or whether it's for the core unlockers, this kind of setup, this kind of build is pretty much going to get you there, and it's probably going to get you there the fastest. So that's the module side done. Let's start talking about the rest of the gear, and then we can still wrap this up. So the main kind of reactor that you will be going for is going to be this one for the mobbing. Personally, I think this is best in slot. Being able to get your crit rate up to 100%, so it's guaranteed, is fantastic. It means that you have the best chance of being able to get your MP back. It allows you to pretty much consistently deal that high amount of damage that you've already invested into. Combine that with a mounting of tactical rifle as well, which means that you can equip Secret Garden so you get extra skill power on top of that. It is just pretty much the way to be able to go for in my eyes. Now, if you are looking to be able to go for Defiler side of things, then there is a different kind of reactor that you do want to go for, and this is the one that I've currently kind of like leaned towards. This is going to be rolls of additional skill attack when attacking Colossus. Ideally, you do want this gold, but purple is still kind of fine, but getting an extra roll into some extra damage, so whether it's tech skill, whether it's electric, or whether it's critical hit damage, is going to be the way forward. Personally, I found that going for tech skill, because of how the resistance or the critical resistance of the boss kind of works into it, it made more sense to be able to go for a power boost ratio, but you definitely could get away with a critical hit damage increase, and that will definitely kind of like see you through as well. Components wise, the only set you should be considering, whether it's for mobbing, whether it's for bossing, whether it's for Colossus, is going to be Slayer. Slayer 4-piece is pretty much going to be the way through. The main reason is because this gives you the most amount of damage increase to your skills, but on top of that you can actually kind of subvert the skill cost increase, because of how easy it is to be able to recover your MP as Ines Raya. So you do want to be able to go for roles like MP recovery and max HP. Max MP in gold is almost crucial to be able to get the most out of it, but being able to get that extra roll into MP recovery in combat is fantastic. Your memory, you do kind of want to be able to go for an MP recovery modifier, would be best in slot, but electric resistance and defense is still fantastic, and then being able to get a gold toxin resistance is going to help you out in that Defiler fight. Just be able to try and like recover from a hit or something like that. It's going to give you the best shot that you're going to actually have inside that fight. Now, weaponry wise, there is pretty much only one solution that we can actually kind of like suggest to you, and that's going to be Secret Garden. In case you've been living under a rock and you don't actually know what the Secret Garden does, every single time you cast a tech skill at 4 out of 4 ranks, this is going to give you a chance of being able to get pest control at 50%, and this will last for 10 seconds, and it will give you extra stacks of skill power, and it will give you additional skill power per stack after that as well. So the more you can kind of like stack this, the more you get. I believe this does give you 37% increase to your skill power at max stacks, but either way, that's a huge increase to the amount of DPS which you're going to be getting from spamming out your abilities, so it makes the most sense that you can use Secret Garden, and you can pretty much get your extra damage and just pretty much keep it up and running, so you're just benefiting from it the whole kind of run. It's especially easy to be able to keep this up through Purge Runs. It's especially easy to be able to keep up during Defiler fights, so Secret Garden is pretty much best in slot when it comes to that. One thing that I will point out when you are working your way towards level 20 on your Purge Runs is you will come across elemental shields. The best way to be able to deal with those, even on electric resistance, is going to be grabbing your Voltia. Your Voltia is going to shred through those shields, which will then just pretty much get rid of any elemental resistance that they have, and that will allow you to be able to then spam your skills so you can actually get all the way through. So I would recommend being able to have this as your secondary weapon so you can swap to it as and when you need it, but Voltia is still a fantastic weapon in this brand new content, and it's definitely worthwhile being able to keep that to one side. Lastly, let's talk about reinforcement side of things. In terms of like how you want to go against the Defiler, this is the current setup that I currently rock. I do personally think this is probably best in slot. You do want your antibody explosion to try and increase your all attribute resistance so you can try and tank at least one hit. Heightened Sentry Cells is going to give you extra HP as well as MP recovery while you stand near the boss. This is going to help you out with being able to spam your abilities just in case your critical hits are just kind of missing on those 5%. And then lastly, you do want a tribute with your focus rounds. You can go with any elements that you pretty much need, but I do go for fire just as standard. But essentially you're going for these enhanced focus rounds so that you can apply a debuff to reduce elemental resistance on the boss, and that will do extra damage with your skills as well on top of that. If you are going into the Purge Runs, if you want to be able to mess about with that side of things, I would recommend being able to take these off. I would recommend going for Arcade Boost. You could go for Antibody Explosion again to be able to give you a little bit of tankiness, and then lastly you can go for Biodensity Augmentation to be able to give yourself even more max HP just so you can survive those hits, or alternatively, if you're feeling a little bit risky, you can go for Concentration, and this will increase your max MP, thereby also increasing the amount of critical hit chance, so if you need that extra help, that exists right there. And with all that out of the way, that wraps it up on the video for Ines Raya and her 2 best builds in the game right now. Honestly, who even needs a Freyna nerf when we can just power creep the hell out of her out of the game just like this? That said, Ines is everything I hoped Keelan would have been and more, being a fun and strong caster Descendant and still bringing speed to the table on top. If this is what we can expect from future Descendants, then I've got high hopes for the next one. But this is the section I want to hear from you. How are you finding the new update so far? Have you unlocked Ines Raya already? And lastly, what about these new Void Boss outfits? Not gonna lie, Defiler is in for a bad time. Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. As I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well. See you all on the next video.